You good? Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Mathilde Moffat-Bourassa, and I'm studying at Laval University in psychoeducation. I've been involved with my peer Elise Gagnon in the organization of the symposium. I have worked under the supervision of Professor Isabelle Fortin-Dufour. It is my great honor to introduce this conference today. First, we would like to welcome you to the first session of the online International Congress on Assisted Desistance. The organization of the symposium has faced many challenges. We are proud to have found solutions. We thank you all, and in particular our guest speakers who will share with us the result of their research work. These works are all published in the last edition of the Journal of Criminology. They are all available online. Before inviting the first speaker, let me give you some information. Today, we will have 3 consecutive presentations. 1 question period will follow, and at the end of 3 conferences. During the presentation, we ask you to mute your microphone. We would appreciate that you keep your cameras open. As we mentioned previously in the communication, this session is recorded and will be available later. Thank you very much for your collaboration and your presence. Without further ado, I will present our first speaker, Professor Chad Maruna. Chad Maruna is Professor of Criminology at Queen's University, Belfast. His research focuses on desistance from crime and implication from reintegration after prisons. He is the co-author and co-editor of 7 books, including Rehabilitation Beyond the Risk Paradigm, The Effects of Imprisonment, and most recently, the Oxford Handbook of Criminology. His book, Making Good: How Ex-Convicts Reformed and Rebuilt Their Lives, was named the Outstanding Contribution to Criminology in 2001. He also received the inaugural Research Medal from the Howard League for Penal Reform for his research impact on the criminal justice system. Now, please welcome Professor Maruna.
Thanks very much. I'm going to share my screen. All goes well. And am I sharing? Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Well, no, that's not wonderful. Go back. Okay. I'm just going to try to move these pictures. Great. Thank you very much. Look, it's a real honor for me to be here and to kick off what is a very exciting series of web seminars on assisted desistance. It's always exciting for me to join a group, especially one like yours that's getting excited about desistance from crime and taking it in new directions. Just last week, I was asked to do another seminar series they're doing on desistance in Chile, and you've been following the news, all the going on in Chile at the moment with the election and of course COVID and so forth. It is remarkable that they're spending time getting excited about desistance from crime, and they are, it happens all over the place. I've been doing this research and these kind of seminars now for well over 20 years. So I feel like I'm a desistance dinosaur in lots of ways. And I'm really very happy to hand over the baton to new generation of researchers and thinkers like yourselves. But I'm very honored to be asked to kick off this series, and also to kick off the special issue. And I think the role of dinosaurs like myself is to think historically a little bit. This is largely my contribution in this paper, I think, is a historical one. And it's not coincidental that it is those of us who've been around longer that get interested in this, the thing that Paul Rock, who was probably in his 60s when he came up with this phrase, chronocentrism and British criminology, this notion of so much in criminology is focused on the present. And you know, if you look at our bibliographies, so often the oldest citation in an article is 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and we forget that there was this long history that came before. And it happens in every field, and it's perfectly natural. But again, it's important to remind ourselves that we've been here before, that this isn't the first time we've had these arguments, and how did they go the last time we've had them, you know, and that goes in all walks of life. The older you get, the more you start to see those echoes in the past and the like. I'm going to start my history about 50 years ago. I'm going to go back to the 1970s. That's again, no coincidence. That's when I entered the world, and we all know the kind of story of the 1970s in this field was this time of the great decline of the rehabilitative ideal. This notion that rehabilitation, as the great Richard Korn had said, no one would even use the word rehabilitation in the 1970s, 1980s without some level of apprehension. Every textbook, and this is just one called Key Ideas in Criminology, joined on the pylon to say that rehabilitation was dead as an idea. And there were many official death notices and reports, like the May report in 1979 by the Home Office. The rhetoric of treatment and training has had its day and should be replaced. If you know this story, you know there's a villain, as in any good story, and the villain here infamously was actually a really good guy, a scholar named Robert Martinson, who in 1974 through 1976 or 79 or so released a series of papers where he increasingly got confident in declaring that the answer to the question of what works in terms of rehabilitation was that nothing much worked. And as I say, at first he was modest about this conclusion. Later, as this shocking realization dawned, he got more enthusiastic and decided that much of what we know about rehabilitation is pageantry, rumination, and rubbish. With everything we know about rehabilitation and 30 cents, you can buy a cup of coffee in New York City. And to many, you know, Martinson killed rehabilitation. In truth, if rehabilitation did die, in truth, this wasn't the case. Or like any, you know, academic, we tend to think our work has this massive impact on the world around us. But in truth, he was in the right place at the right time. As the great David Garland said, you know, this notion that one study or a series of studies somehow changed the penal landscape against rehabilitation is definitely a fairy story. But Martinson was in the right place or the wrong place at the right time, and a lot of forces converged from the left and the right in the 1970s to create this ritualistic death of rehabilitation. Just as ritualistically, there was a rebirth, and somehow rehabilitation was risen from the ashes. And this is a address from 2004 by the great criminologist Frank Cullen, who argued that there were 12 people who saved rehabilitation. To the pride of your country, most of these were Canadians. They were a team of Canadian researchers who got together and challenged this notion of nothing works. He contends that the saving of rehabilitation was a contingent reality that emerged due to the efforts of this loosely coupled group of criminologists. They rejected the nothing works ideology and instead used their rigorous science to save rehabilitation. Again, this is something of a fairy story, perhaps, of research, but it's one that is widely told. And we got in the early 1990s the emergence of this notion of what works, and what works went from a question to an answer, and it became an international global sensation well beyond criminology and criminal justice. What works became a shorthand for the movement around evidence-based policy. And again, Canada plays a large role in this, both in the role of evidence-based medicine movement that started out of McMaster College all the way to the massive body of literature reviews, systematic, I should say, reviews, meta-analyses, evaluations, and random controlled trials around rehabilitation that emerged, that became known by this shorthand of what works in criminal justice. Around about the same time in the 1970s, there was another movement afoot, and this was this notion of desistance from crime. One of the first authors to use the term in the title of a paper and to use it more widely was a guy called Gordon Trassler. And Trassler, a British criminologist, said that the word was first developed or used by Marv Wolfgang and Wolfgang's research on life histories and criminal careers. That's actually not true. It turns out that Wolfgang's long-term research collaborator, Thorsten Selin, had used the term himself way back in 1942. And of course, it was Selin and the Glucks writing in the 1940s that gave us this notion of maturational reform and the idea that became known as spontaneous or natural desistance. And this was an idea that was very influential in the 1970s and the 1980s. This is Jeff Fagan writing here in 1989. He says there's sort of two ways desistance was being used in the 80s. One, in the broadest sense, it just referred to the termination of criminal behavior for any reason except for incapacitation. He says in a more narrow sense, it refers to termination in the absence of the effects of others. So the idea of spontaneous desistance, as he says, was people who desisted. What true desistance was people who desisted on their own without being influenced by anyone, by presumably even friends and neighbors or family members, but certainly not support groups, certainly not rehabilitation in any of its kind of informal or formal forms. True desistance, spontaneous desistance, was something that came from within the person. And for many, this was a kind of biological change that happened. So we got the most influential writers of the 1980s, Gottfredson and Hershey, writing about criminology and their famous general theory of crime, says, look, crime declines with age. We'll give you that. Spontaneous desistance is just that. It's change in behavior that can't be explained and change that occurs regardless of whatever else happens. So again, this notion of desistance as this sort of spontaneous event. And this is still largely believed today in many circles. This is a quote from Time magazine saying, look, it has been said that the most effective crime fighting tool is a 30th birthday, suggesting that, since there's nothing magical about a 30th birthday party, presumably there's something magic about that aging process and turning 30 that changes people in the ways that regular crime fighting tools do not, rehabilitation. So some of the policy implications of the notion of spontaneous desistance back in the 70s, you could have gone any way with this. It certainly would suggest a movement away from rehabilitation, as Craig Nedler wrote at the time, not Craig Nedler, Nedler wrote at the time back in 1974. He says, since most people will mature out of criminal behavior, it's questionable whether we should be focusing on rehabilitation to begin with. He uses different language. You could take this in a kind of radical non-intervention approach. You could say, well, let's get rid of all the interventions with young men or young people in trouble with the law, because they're going to age out of crime anyway. And this, you could also take something called the non-intervention paradigm, which I'll talk about in a few slides. Or you could interpret this to say, well, what we really need to do is lock away all these 19 and 20-year-olds because they're highly at risk, and we'll let them out of prison when they turn 30. And this was actually remarkably the choice that was made and at least in the South and the United States. This is just one of my favorite cautionary tales that I always like to tell. This is from a 1995 book by John McKnight, and it gives me chills as a desistance researcher. McKnight is going on a tour of Cook County Jail in Chicago, and he's looking down over this massive room where he sees in front of him over 1,000 young Black males and Latino males who are staring off into space. They're playing cards, they're watching TV, but essentially they look like they're vegetating. They look like human warehouse of young males. And he turns to his warden and he says, "This is outrageous. What's going on here? Where's the rehabilitation? Where's the treatment?" And the warden turns to him and he says, "Well, you don't realize this, but what you are witnessing is the only type of rehabilitation that we know works. These men are aging. When they reach a certain time in their late 20s or early 30s, they're going to stop engaging in criminal behavior, and it's our job to hold them until they do," which is a absolutely terrible interpretation of the desistance literature. But it makes sense if you believe that desistance is somehow spontaneous, somehow comes from biology or comes from on high as an automatic requirement of the aging process. So flash forward, and I know I only have seconds left here. We have the great debate between what works researchers and desistance researchers over the last 2 decades or so. And I've been an active part of this back and forth as much as I wish that I hadn't been. And in the paper that I know is being circulated in the special issue, I try to take on both sides this time, calling a kind of truce to the war. And I say, look, on the one hand, what works makes all sorts of medical model mistakes. There's all sorts of incorrect thinking that has gone into this notion of what works and the rehabilitation process. First of all, there's a problem with what, and then secondly, there's a problem with works. But I'll focus on the what. This notion that we can come up with a rehabilitation thing or whatever it is that can be somehow exported, that we have this model that does the work of rehabilitation in the same way as the second quote says, an ointment can reduce a rash, a vapor can unblock the airways, an antibiotic can act on microorganisms. We'd like to think that we've come up with this treatment that changes offending. And of course, we're nowhere close to that. And as Mike Huff says, rather than all this work looking for the what, looking for this magic bullet that will somehow reduce criminality, what we need instead is a focus on the complexity of human beings and how they change and what skills are involved in that changing process. I also in the paper take on, though, the notion of spontaneous desistance, which thankfully is no longer used as a term, but has been taken on only a few other times, one of which is a lovely paper by Takala, where he takes apart all this notion, what could we possibly mean by spontaneous desistance? When we say that people change on their own, does it mean that they've never been through the justice system? In which case that would preclude most of our research. Does it mean they've never had friends or support networks or the like? I mean, what could we even be talking about? Most people, well, hardly anybody, actually changes without the help of anyone. And this is why that I mentioned that notion of the non-treatment paradigm, again, out of the 1970s, a largely forgotten paper, really got it. Tony Bottoms, Bill McWilliams, writing in the time of the Nothing Works movement, really captured, okay, we have to get rid of the notion of the medical model, this idea that we can diagnose and treat offending like as if it was a COVID-19. Absolutely, they got that, but they didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. They said, we could change the language, but also the ideology away from a treatment model toward a relationship model, moving away from the idea of dosage and before and after treatment, and instead thinking about helping people and thinking about shared assessment, collaboratively defined tasks and so forth. And this is where the desistance, assisted desistance comes in, and you're going to be talking about this for the next couple of weeks. So I won't take up any more of my time. to talk about this, but this is the movement away that I'm seeing around assisted desistance, a movement away from programs and the medical model to a much more organic social model that looks at not treatment effects, but rather relationships and how those relationships guide people's journeys away from crime, a move away from trying to who can come up with this perfect model or manual that's going to free us from crime, and rather learning from those who've been down this journey before. And finally, moving away from forever targeting these deficits, these risk factors and need factors, and instead letting people's strengths emerge because they're already on a journey toward assistance, and helping speed up that process and move it along. And that's me. I look forward to taking some questions when we get to that part. So I will stop sharing.
So thank you, Professor Marina, for your excellent presentation. We will now proceed with the next conference of Professor Fortin-Dufour. Isabelle Fortin-Dufour has a PhD in social work. She is an associate professor in psychoeducation at Laval University. Her research interests are centered around the analysis of the process leading to desistance from crime in both adolescent and adult populations. She is the co-editor of the special issue on assisted desistance for the Revue Criminologie. She is also the lead organizer of this conference. So please welcome Isabelle Fortin-Dufour.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you, especially being just right after Shad. No, I'm not impressed. No, I'm not nervous, even though my English is so bad. So please bear with me. I'll do my best to be understandable. This paper, I'm not the lead on that. It's Marie-Pierre, and she cannot be with us today, nor is Stéphane Farol, who worked with us. So bear with me. I'll be the only one talking to you today. So as Dr. Marina presentation explained, we moved away from focusing on, Elise, you can, you want me to do it? Okay, you can go down again. Okay, whoa, go back. Okay, so desistance focus on understand how people change from going to being a criminal to being a disaster. A better understanding of this process might help us understand how we can facilitate it with proper help. And it's quite surprising that I'm using the word help as Sir Anthony Bottoms used it in 1979. As you say, we forget from where we come from. Assisted desistance refer to such help given to would-be disasters and can take many forms. Informal help can be provided by volunteers through various programs attending on voluntary basis. We can see that arts, sports, music can help people start their journey on resistance. If you are interested in that, there's a published paper on that as well. But today what we're gonna focus on is what we call formal help. Why formal? Because this help is given by people that are employees of the criminal justice system, such as probation and correction officers. So these people do have the finality of helping people help change, and they have to do it while using both supervision, controls, and help. So they have, you know, to wear two hats, and it's quite difficult sometimes to be able to balance just that as well. So as we move to the next one, assisted desistance in formal setting is this. It's a fragile balance between a legalistic, controlling, supervision role and a therapeutic role. And considering there is a growing interest on assisted desistance, we decided to conduct a scoping review in order to be able to identify all formal intervention can assist desistance. And it's very important to know that instead of looking at what works, like, you measure something at the beginning and you measure something at the end, and then you say, if we see this change, it's the program. All these studies, asked people that were under this help or received this help or collaborated to this help, how they see it. So it's really the point of view of people that are desisting that we're gonna talk about. What we did that for is also to facilitate dissemination of this research finding to policymakers, practitioners, would-be desisters. I mean, we wish that these ideas, go through the more people. That would be the idea, and also to guide future research. What we did is we searched, Elise, please, thank you. We searched 10 electronic database from November 2016 to November 1929. It doesn't mean that we stayed on that for 3 years, but instead it was a back and forth thing that we do first reading of what we have, and then we go back to see if there's something new. And every time we do, there's more and more and more article coming up. So this, we had to stop somewhere, but we could be working at this for the next 10 years from what I see. There is very growing interest on this thing called assistant desistance. And we use 15 different keywords because during time, it changed from, people didn't know how to call assistant desistance before. So there's help, there's intervention, there's rehabilitation, there's reintegration. So there's lots of different words people use. But mainly the idea was to say, is there a point of view from the people? And that's how we collected these articles. At first, we have 1,370 records. We read the abstract, and from the abstract, we were able to discard 1,200 of those. We could see that we're not talking about desistance, but more on what works. So we just discard them. And then we read 165 articles, and then we have to discard another 141 because either there were, no desistance at all in the thing, or it was not related to the journey of desistance. And then from the remaining 24 articles, we find 2 more that were probably not properly listed in the database. So we came up with 26 different data. As you can see, and go back, UK flag is huge, and it's proportional. Most of the study that we find came from the UK. In fact, we had 11 coming from UK. And then you see on the bottom left, you have 6 from USA. So a little bit coming from North America. And then you have 2 from Canada. 1 is mine, so I'm very happy to be represented here. And then you have 1 for Belgium, 1 from Australia, and 1 from Ireland, that is Southern Ireland. So there's this thing is very coming from UK, and that's probably because of the non-paradigm treatments. I don't know, but it really is coming from the other side of the ocean. This is how we extracted data from the study. For each one, we extract what are the others, what year it was product, from which country, what's the sample, what's the methodology, the setting, the teams. As you can see at the bottom, that's the study of Monica that she will be talking to you later. So we can see that she's been studying a lot of people that are for a long time with different type of methodology, and then what are the teams that she was working on. So that's what we did for all our study. What we find is most of them use qualitative interviews. And if we look at the 20 studies, what we're gonna talk about came from 459 different interviewees. So we could say that's probably a lot of people that are offering their point of view on assisted desistance. The sample are a majority of males on most of the study. We have only 1 study at the time that were focused on only female. Age of participants also seems to vary. We have 8 studies that are studying adults up to 80 years, 6 that are focusing on young adults, 1 on teenager, and for 5, we just can figure out what was the name of the participant, what was the age of the participant. On the offense type, we have also kind of 2 different ideas. Some are working with all kinds of offenders, against the person, sexual offense, drug offense. You know, they all see disasters as just one big group. And we can see now that the new papers are more focused on sexual offense, and some do not mention what crimes people did. If we now look at the results, oh, it's not working. Is it gonna work? It was supposed to be beautiful. Well, that's too bad. Results, then we can move. Oh yes, now it's moving. Okay, thank you. Elise, you can go on to the next one. Okay, what people told us is at the beginning of the journey, it's very, very frightening. I mean, they don't know what's going to happen. If they're in prison, it's not a safe place to be. People are feeling that they're losing themselves. They just don't know what to do. They're filled with ambivalence, and they're just, it's hurtful, you know. And what people say is that your first thought is, I want to go back to what I know, because that's safest. I mean, that's the only thing I know. I've been doing this for the last years. I know people. I know I'm good at this. I know I can do it. So basically, you know, when people entered into the system, their first thought is, I want to go back. This thing is too complicated. I don't like it. I want to go back to the lives I have before. And it might feel like, oh, that's not what we want. We would expect them to use this time to change and stuff. But we all the same. I mean, we've been doing this for the last months in the COVID, and we all we're thinking is, I want to go back. So it's just a normal feeling that people have when you are feeling unbalanced or scared. You pretty much want to go back. So what you have to do at this point is secure people. I mean, preparing the ground is the most important part of the journey, because people fear the future. And if you're not there, if you're not telling them that it's possible, if you're not taking time to help them grasp what's going on, grasp what's at stake, and if you don't take this time to properly explain your role, explain what you cannot do, if you don't take the time to secure people, probably the next steps won't be happened. If you want to move forward, you have to sow the seeds. And this is also coming from the people that were able to change. What they say is, when they come up to you at first, what they need is what we call concrete, basic social work. They need help filling forms, dealing with emotional problems, finding a place to stay, getting a job, finding a training. So basically, they just don't know what to do most of the time. They feel, as I said, pretty much lost in the thing. So you have first to answer to these basic needs that people explain, because if this is not covered, they cannot move on. And then the structure provided by supervision can get the assistance going by challenging thought process and opening door to cognitive shifts. So at this point, we move from security to talk. It's important to be able to connect with the people and being able to explore new ways of being, explore what positive selves can be complaining. It's important to keep on giving a sense of security of people re-entering and the community and facilitate social connection with others. But it's a slow process. At this point, if people are secure, you have to be patient. You have to sow the seeds and secure by talking. So that's the talking stage. If you move to the next one, at this point, people are people are starting to show little different in their self narratives. They're talking about them differently, and that's the cue. That's the cue you have to be waiting for, because when you see this little change in the way people talk about themselves, when you see a little change about how people see the future, or see their friendships, or see their relationship with their mother or friends or anything, that's when you have to step in, because this is where they are at the juncture between two different identities. They are not offenders anymore. They're not citizens anymore. They're just in this in-between situation. And friends, colleagues have shown that this phase is quite difficult. You neither this, neither that, and people are struck in this phase. So you have to push a little bit forward. It's not the time to talk now. It's the time to tackle resistance. That's where you have to push a little bit forward. You have to help people change their narrative. And as you see, there are many studies showing how it's important to reframe self-narrative. It's important to see the thing that are good in the people, and they have to see them too. So the job is to contemplate the new change and see how good they are. And then you have to take action to overcome the obstacles with disasters face in their reintegration, rather than talking about them. So we're not in the talking phase anymore. We know that resistance needs a reframing. So we have to take opportunities that are there. So you have to have people seize opportunity, seize the help, seize the job, seize the new identity, sees everything that is possible from them. So this is the action session of resistance. And then if we can do that, we are in the wake of cognitive and identity shifts. So sorry, my English is horrible. Cognitive and identity shifts. Because we know now there are no resistance without identity change. These identity change can be minor from some. They just change from I used to be this and now I'm that. But for some are so major, then when they talk about them, they use, they talk about this person as a third person. I used to be this guy. I used to be that person. For some, the identity shift is very, very important. At this point, if you work very hard with the would-be disasters, somehow is kind of do it also because you're in it. People are going to say, oh, she worked so hard. She was there all the time. She did all this, all that for me. I cannot let her, I cannot let her be disappointed. I cannot just stop now because she believes in me and she's shown me all the way. And I'm using she because most probation agents in Canada are now women. So, this quality of relationship initiated cognitive change, decision-making, problem-solving skills. People are changing if you are in a welfare-oriented state, and if you are showing genuine care, concern, interest. And then this genuine care, concern will be able to solidify disaster commitment and conformity. It will help him or her develop a self-worth and a sense of being important to someone, and that someone could be you, and that would enable them to pursue conventional goals. So at this point, you just assist the person is on its or her or his journey. They now have the skills, they now have the idea, they now have this new identity, they have new things they want to do, they have these new goals, they have this new motivation. So at this point, you just let them be. So what does it say about what is central about the assistance is giving more attention to positive actions. You know, what we did in the last 20 years is control, 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 risk, risk, risk. And we know that if you can only focus on risk, you won't be seeing what's going on. You won't be seeing the change. You won't be seeing the positivity. You won't be seeing the small steps people are doing. So you should focus on solution and tackle obstacle to desistance, and make sure desistance are architects of their desistance and not some passive subject of penal control. So what we would like to offer you is this new way of saying desistance, assisted desistance. What we have on the left, the left corner is that people do not start their sentences the same place. Some people start their sentence and they're quite socially insert. You have some people that, you know, had a great life. They were, you know, selling drugs, but they had a restaurant, and the people in the restaurant didn't know they were selling drugs, and they have a wife, they have kids and stuff. So these people, when they come into the sentence, they are willing to change. They want their life back. These people have immediate response to your help. So that's probably the one you're gonna like more, because they're gonna do all the work for you. These ones are very motivated and they want to change. So they're probably gonna be, you know, pushing forward. And in one of my previous paper, I call them the remorseful. You know, they're our favorite clients. They do all the work by themselves. But if you move all the way down to this thing, people are so much embedded in this structure. They don't have access to social capital. They are in disadvantage. They are in all these stereotypes and everything. So they're quite very low on their willingness to change. They're quite very low on their motivation. So when they come up to you, you know, you cannot expect them to be running fast as the first one. So you have to be patient. And it's normal that in the first weeks, you won't see little or no immediate response. They would be quite, you know, don't want to change, because, you know, that's normal. That's what people want. They don't want to change. So you have to be patient. That's where you have to secure them. And when they feel safe, they move on to the next step. And when they're on the next step, that's when you can do the talking, because they are already a little bit more open to that. And then the little change you see, you have to reinforce them. You have to say, oh, I'm sensing something is moving on. And then when they start to do the thing, they have this resistance going on. That's when you tackle. That's when you help them access the opportunity that are available from them in the structure. That's when you have them grabbing the hook for change, as Giordano says. And then if you keep on doing that, you're going to see their identity change. They're going to talk differently about them. They're going to talk differently about their friends, their life, that what they want to do in the future. And then you know that you can let them take a little bit more risk by themselves, take more chances on them, because they're on their journey. You have to let go a little bit more, because they probably gonna do their self change. So you have to be more willingful to give them a little bit more free time. So if we look at this, what we see is that all we have to do all along is being able to give positive feedbacks, helping the people experience social recognitions, feeling of citizenship. All these things are all the way through, because this is how we know from the people that were able to change, how change happened in their lives. So basically that's what all these studies put all together are saying about the process of assisting the system. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fortin-Dufour, for your inspiring presentation. Now for the third presentation, I would like to introduce Professor Monica Barry. Monica Barry is a freelance researcher working on both youth and criminal justice policy and practice. She is currently working on the use of the philosophical concept of recognition in respect of offending and desistance in youth, and is also doing research in remand and buy, and the interface between the youth and criminal justice system in Scotland. So please welcome Professor Berry.
Right. It's gone. Sorry, it's disappeared. Give me a second. Sorry, I'm having problems with this.
Do you want us to do it, Monica, or you prefer to?
I want to reduce the screen. Can you all see? Can you all see this?
I'm not. Did you click share your screen?
Wait a minute. I'm gonna. Right. Hopefully this will work. Can you see all this?
No, sorry.
God. Share screen.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, it's working.
Hey. Right. Thank God for that. From the beginning. Okay. Yes, it's good to see you all, but it would have been nicer to have been in Quebec in person, however. In this presentation, I want to talk about what I call the individualization of desistance and how it impacts on what we know about assisted desistance. I first outline the main groups of desistance theory before giving you the findings of the study that Isabel mentioned of young offenders in Scotland. This study asked two questions of two waves of young people about what helped and hindered in the process of desistance and what they thought people should do to encourage desistance. The particular findings relevant to assisted desistance will be grouped under three key headings: peer-led assistance, practitioner-led assistance, and state-led assistance. I then introduced the concept of recognition, which is well known in philosophy, but seldom used in criminology. I conclude the presentation by suggesting that state-led assistance, which should be informed by mutual recognition, I would argue, is crucial in the process of reducing and stopping crime, and we should avoid individualizing desistance in the fight against crime. Sorry, I'm having problems with my mouse. So. Bear with me. Right. When I talk about the individualization of desistance, I remember Beck's use of the phrase the individualization of risk, where he described contemporary individuals having to produce, stage, and cobble together their biographies themselves. This is often the case in theories of desistance, where the onus is often placed on the would-be desister to stop offending out of their own choice and through their own volition. Furlong on Cartmel suggested that it was an epistemological fallacy that young people draw on individual responsibility and self-determination as a means to change their circumstances, and do that at the expense of social and structural barriers to change. Young people tend to believe that it is their ability and choice alone to change their circumstances. In this regard, failure comes from the choices and actions of the individual and not from any failings of the state. The state is, in effect, vindicated. The concept of assisted desistance identifies two forms of assistance towards stopping offending: formal assistance and informal assistance from peers or social networks. However, the assumption is that these forms of assistance will help the individual to break away from a criminal lifestyle, him or herself. Thus, the concept of assisted desistance, as it currently stands, tends to support the notion of the individualization of desistance, that agency is more important than structure. But when you ask young people themselves what helps them break away, they suggest it is more structural and practical support rather than personal or emotional support, and that such support is as crucial from the state as it is from practitioners or peers. Young people cannot stop offending merely with the support of peers and practitioners. It needs more structural input from policymakers across a wider range of policy arenas, rather than just merely criminal justice. Thus, I would add a third form of assistance, that is state-led assistance, where politicians and policymakers take a more proactive stance in changing the environment within which crime might be encouraged. You're all familiar with these theories of desistance, but I'll just run through them quickly. There are three main types: agentic, structural, and integrative. Agentic theories tend to focus on age, attitudes, and personal characteristics of would-be desisters. Structural theories of desistance emphasize the role of social bonds such as schooling, employment, family, and marriage. And integrative theories take both structure and agency into account, stressing how personal choices are combined with social resources in finding and sustaining opportunities to stop offending. Self-identity, motivation, and status are important in this regard, such as having a job, an income, or someone to love and care for. These are kind of hooks for change. However, despite the increasing focus on structural opportunities to change, much of the desistance literature still argues that the individual has to grasp that opportunity with both hands. Structural barriers, not least for young people in transition who are embroiled in the criminal justice system, tend to be underplayed by some theories. And going on to the study, the Scottish desistance study, as I called it, involved interviews with 40 young people aged 18 to 33 in 2000-2001, interviews with 20 of those same people in 2010-11, 10 years later, and interviews with a further 20 more recent clients aged 21 to 33 in 2010-11. All had been on intensive probation in the past. Their average previous convictions was about 30 to 35, so they were pretty persistent offenders. They had an offending history spanning 7 to 13 years, and offences involved theft, assault, and drug-related offending, primarily. The path to desistance was zigzag because of peer influences, homelessness, addictions, and criminal justice involvement. These issues were structural in nature, not agentic, beyond their capacity to change. The issues were also beyond the capacity of, I would argue, peers and practitioners to change, hence the need for state-led assistance. I'd now like to focus on the findings under the headings of peer-led, practitioner-led, and state-led assistance. Firstly, peer-led is akin to informal assistance and includes not only family, friends, and mentors, but also, I would argue, possibly the emotional support offered by social workers or probation officers. And I should add that in Scotland, social workers are trained in criminal justice, so they're still called social workers rather than probation officers. The main way my respondents thought their peers could help would be through talking and listening. They talked about what is commonly called generativity. In the criminal literature means an individual's desire to care for or show concern towards others and to make a lasting contribution to future generations based on their own, usually negative experiences in the past. As Emma said at interview, I would like to be a worker that goes around and tells people, look, this is how it is, you know, like real life, not textbook junkies that just read the book. In terms of practitioner-led assistance, I've broken up formal assistance into two parts, practitioner-led and state-led. And the former arguably is what happens on the ground, the latter behind the scenes. Modifying behavior through cognitive behavioral therapy was an original aim of probation programs in the 1980s, but latterly such programs have tended to obscure the broader political and welfare concerns that encourage offending behavior. They are seen by both policymakers and practitioners as enabling individuals to have the confidence and ability to surmount any structural deficits by developing pro-social problem-solving skills. However, Farrell, for example, notes that such cognitive behavioral interventions are, and I quote, unable to address the wider social context in which these probationers live, and as such are unable to address social and economic needs. However, there is a fear, some would say an acceptance amongst practitioners, that they have little room for maneuver when it comes to addressing wider social problems. Bottoms and Chatland, for example, suggest that interventions with offenders to address their wider needs are not always seen as, quote, valued activity by practitioners. As well as Bottoms and Chatland and Steve Farrell and colleagues today, McCulloch in 2005 noted that a sample of practitioners in her study did not think that probation per se could resolve wider social problems amongst service users, and that probation staff could only offer emotional rather than practical support. Indeed, her sample of service users agreed that it was up to them to resolve their own problems. And this ties in with Furlong and Cartmell's epistemological fallacy, as noted earlier. McCulloch concludes that it is perhaps more desirable, as well as more realistic and inclusive, for probation to direct its efforts towards developing the individual and community partnerships needed to enable probationers to achieve these goals themselves. I accept that it's not readily within the gift of ground level staff to single-handedly change policy and practice, not least in the current economic and political climate. The forum where such change should happen is at the state level. The policy-making frameworks that govern how services to young people generally are delivered. And that takes me on to what I would call state-led assistance. In the study that I did with these 40 young people, they suggested that the state, rather than practitioners, should take greater responsibility for wider structural barriers to the integration of young people in transition, and in 4 specific ways. Firstly, in terms of both preventing and reducing youth crime, they suggested offering young people better, more affordable leisure activities, since boredom and a lack of constructive alternatives to offending were of obvious concern to these young people. As Teresa said, there has to be stuff put in before people get to the stage where they're offending, like youth groups. I know a lot of it is about money, but I think there has to be more options for young people, more activity-based stuff that doesn't cost a lot of money. If you can get young people attending different things like that, there'll be less risk of hanging about the streets. Secondly, they wanted more drug and alcohol advice to educate and deter young people from getting addicted. Thirdly, they mentioned unemployment, homelessness, and poverty as structural barriers to desistance, which required state involvement. And finally, they mentioned prevention through early intervention. For example, giving talks in schools using ex-offenders as peer mentors. However, some warned against early intervention within the youth justice system, as this could cause offending to escalate. One respondent, Nick, suggested that young people who were getting into trouble should be nurtured, not nagged. He said, "Stop messing with their heads when they're young, nurture them." Nurture is a concept that epitomizes what state-led assistance should look like, in my view. It means encouraging the development of children and young people through proactive interventions and opportunities. It also means giving recognition to young people's aspirations towards integration and normality. And that takes me on to the concept of recognition, which originated in social philosophy and refers to the need for mutual acknowledgement of identity and diversity. From a criminological perspective, I would define it as the giving and receiving of acknowledgement, encouragement, and affirmation to promote social identity and respect. The concept has two strands: as an investment in others, the provision of opportunities which enable young people to become contributing members of mainstream society. And in return for love from significant others and opportunities from the state, young people may invest their confidence, skills, and commitment to a law-abiding lifestyle by supporting others through generativity, sustained employment, and parenthood. Recognition can also be seen as a reward, encompassing love, respect, and esteem, and ascribing to individuals and groups positive status. The concept relates primarily to, in the philosophy literature at least, to race, gender, sexuality, and class. And within social philosophy and critical theory, it relates to not just acknowledgement of one's identity or cultural status, which they define as recognition, but also to one's socio-economic status, which they call redistribution. However, it has not been used within the philosophical literature to date in respect of age. In particular, young people who, I would argue, are a group in need of recognition, not least because of their liminal status in the transition to adulthood. However, young people tend to be misrecognized as targets for criminal and youth justice interventions, for example, and suffer from maldistribution of resources, not least in a neoliberal culture of individualization and blame. Nancy Fraser in 2003 differentiated two possible solutions to the problem of misrecognition and maldistribution. She talked about affirmative policies which aim to integrate socially excluded groups into the status quo, whilst transformative policies aim to eliminate the underlying structural deficits which create injustice. For young people, affirmative remedies would be employability programs, cognitive behavioral interventions, and targeted state benefits, possibly what current assisted desistance programs may look like as far as practitioners and the state are concerned. Transformative remedies, on the other hand, would mean restructuring state benefits to make them accessible to all, overhauling employment legislation, having a minimum basic wage, and equalizing access to and responses by justice agencies, irrespective of a service user's age or status. And in conclusion, individualization is presented as a desirable and necessary way of life in much of the literature, where the individual is in control of his or her destiny and any wider structural barriers are downplayed. But as Brannan and Nielsen in 2005 commented, To ignore structure is to ignore the possibility of inequalities and differences in resources that are systemic and systematic rather than individual and random. Young people have internalized the individualization thesis, thus further letting the state off the hook. The individualization of desistance, for example, has deflected attention away from the lack of power afforded to probation officers to create change. Likewise, the individualization of desistance has allowed the state, criminal justice policymakers in particular, to focus on offenders and their deficiencies, rather than focusing on wider sociological, political, and economic constraints. The concept of recognition, although a work in progress as far as criminology is concerned, has the benefit of seeing relations of justice as reciprocal and problems of integration as de-individualized. Recognition theory should place as much emphasis on the state as on its citizens for ensuring that young people, amongst other groups, have the opportunities and rewards that might help them integrate into mainstream society without first being labeled as outsiders. I therefore believe that state-led assistance is crucial in the process of desistance, and that we should avoid individualizing desistance in the fight against crime. Thank you. Sorry for the technical hitches earlier.
Thank you, Professor Barry, for your excellent presentation. Now is the question period. So we will have 20 minutes. If you want to ask a question, use the tool to raise your hand or mention it in the chat. When it's your turn, please introduce yourself and to whom the question is addressed. Now we're ready to take the first question. So, okay.
I understand it can be a bit frightening to talk on this thing, knowing it's going to be recorded. Maybe we don't record the questions if you want. Please ask the questions you have at this point. It would be great to hear from you.